Good morning. Just getting ready here. We still got some time before 10 o'clock, so um, take a bit of time just to get prepared here. Uh, got my glasses fixed yesterday, so wearing them again and trying to get used to them. I have my Facebook open right here in front of me, as well as I have my cell phone. Um, if you'd like to send me a text or if you want to comment on the live chat, you can certainly do so to add any comments, thoughts, concerns, um, any questions, of course. And yes, Pike Place today. Coffee of choice today. Um, if you have any issues you'd like to ask the text, I'm pretty happy with both sets of text today from Proverbs and also from Micah. The Micah one is going to be, I think, especially interesting. A little depressing, but very interesting nonetheless. And then Proverbs, some good thoughts today in Proverbs as well. Should be interesting. So we're at 10 o'clock. Good to have you with us today. Why don't we begin? I'm going to close my door real quick just so I don't get any extraneous noise from the church. Hold on. Alrighty, so chapter 25 of Proverbs, and we are on today, to verse 15 to start. Verse 15, with patience a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue will break a bone. Now, this is very interesting because Jesus tells a parable about this. Let's see here. Yeah, Luke chapter 18. Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. We'll just take a quick look at this. It's a very interesting parable. Again, I think this points out where Jesus is our wisdom. He is the personification of wisdom. He tells the exact same stories that we find in wisdom in the Proverbs. And he told them a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, give me justice against my adversary. For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. Now, the Lord goes on specifically to interpret this parable in a different way than we probably would understand it. We would think that from the parable, the point of the parable is to pray and wear down our God, but Jesus is saying no. The point of the parable is that even evil men, can be worn down through persistent prayer. How much more does your Father in heaven listen to you, right? So in other words, he's the opposite of this evil man. He is someone who will attend to your prayers as soon as he hears them. But Jesus does kind of echo what the Proverbs are teaching this morning. I just thought that was very interesting. And, definitely falls into the category of peaceful protests, doesn't it? What was Martin Luther King's preferred way to make a difference in the world, to have his opinion heard, was peaceful protests, standing up against, not doing violence, but our words, softly spoken. He was an eloquent speaker, and he had great things to say as well. And that eventually, there have been people who have done violent things, and who is going to be remembered throughout history? Uh, Martin Luther King's going to be remembered highly throughout history as someone who fought the good fight, did it in the right way, was a man of peace and a man of wisdom and intelligence, right? So I think this is very true. With patience, a ruler may be, and I think we can understand this patience meaning not necessarily. Well, I suppose it could be patience in terms of time, but I think we're speaking of patient speech, right? Why do you go to the ruler most likely to speak to him? Because the second part of the verse then goes, a soft tongue will break him. So this idea of patience, soft speaking to the king, that's going to most likely have the best impact. Okay, really. What's the old idiom? You attract more. I think it's more flies with honey instead of vinegar, something like that. Um, these are common sense things. I think that's the cool thing about the Proverbs is that anyone there's a certain amount of wisdom you can get from the Proverbs without understanding that Jesus is the ultimate source of wisdom. You can still read this and I think learn things, which is pretty cool. Going on, verse 16. If you have found honey, eat only enough for you, lest you have your fill of it and vomit it. Okay, so this is a strange take here. I think we have to go back to one of our stories we probably know very well from Sunday school. Samson kills a lion with his bare hands. He comes by later to the same place where he had done that and sees the carcass of the lion. And bees have set up a nest inside the lion's carcass. And he takes honey from the nest. Now, I think the idea being here is that in this time period in Jewish culture and history, as far as I can tell, there wouldn't have been an idea of raising bees. You wouldn't you wouldn't have a domesticated bee, although I don't think even bees that are in hives that people run are necessarily domesticated. But you get the sense of this, that you wouldn't have bees of your own. Instead, the only time you'd run into honey would be when you'd find it out in the wild. Excuse me. So, it's a blessing. It's a treasure. It's a joy. You run into things out in the wild, and you shouldn't necessarily use them up, but rather leave a blessing behind for someone else. Sometimes it can be, especially when you have little kids, if you leave them to their own devices, they will eat candy until they get sick. They don't think about necessarily blessing someone else with what's there, that some of this might be for someone else. They don't think necessarily that eating too much is going to be a bad thing for them, right? They primarily consume themselves, or they occupy themselves with the thought that this tastes good and that's it. That's as deep as it goes, right? So there is no other thoughts in the brain, so to speak, monitoring the primary thoughts, like so, almost like brain not chemistry, but brain development and structure of our brains. We have a lower brainstem that's in charge of the primary functions of digestion, of breathing, of moving, right? And the higher functions of the brain, the more complex tasks in terms of conscious thought, are held by the other parts of the brain. So, maybe in children we see the fact that just those higher concepts haven't developed yet. They don't have, for lack of a better word, a conscience, so to speak, monitoring them and telling them that eating everything all right now isn't a good idea. The thing that occurred to me this morning when I was preparing for Bible study, though, is that, we just spent some time camping. We just got back from a camping trip in not too far from here, about 30 miles from here. And I have some friends who camp religiously. In fact, South Dakota, lots of people in South Dakota love to camp. It's a thing. The state parks and all the camping areas, boy, they fill up fast. It isn't long. I think they open them up in early spring when there's still snow on the ground, and before you know it, everything's booked up for the whole year. People in South Dakota love to camp. And then of course, we have a lot of connection and history with Teddy Roosevelt here because of Mount Rushmore, things like that. And of course, he was a conservationist, setting up the idea of state parks, national parks, protecting, making sure that there's something for future generations to enjoy. But the concept is maybe simpler than we make it out to be. Maybe the government doesn't necessarily need to be involved. A good person, or maybe a person who reads the scriptures, trusts in God, believes in Yahweh, when they experience the wonders of creation, whether it be honey or whether it be a beautiful place that is, a forest or a lake or a wonderful place to be, you don't destroy that place. You maybe try to leave something for those who come behind you, because taking up everything, eating up everything, what does it do? It makes you sick. There's nothing left for the generation that comes behind you. And I've always felt this way in terms of my work here at the church. Hopefully, what I leave behind for my children in terms of this wonderful, there are flaws in the Constitution. There are flaws in our government. It isn't perfect. But out of all the governmental systems, it is by far the best. A constitutional republic that protects the rights of the minority. And eventually, I think Christians will be the minority. In a true democracy, if there's enough people who want to do a thing, they can do it. So that's why we don't have a democracy. We have a constitutional republic. It's very important to protect our rights, the rights of the minority, as well as the majority, right? I hope to leave behind the same thing that I inherited in terms of my government, in terms of my country, in terms of the landscape, in terms of the beauty of creation that God has given us, in terms of a solid economic future. And hopefully, most importantly, I hope to leave behind for my kids a church that is stronger, that is confessional, that trusts in the scriptures and the Lutheran confessions, that trust in God's word above all things as I go. If I take advantage of the situation and have my fill of it, and don't do anything to maybe preserve something for those who come after me, well, that would be a shame. So I think that's the point here is, there's these blessings that you run into out in creation. We ought to do our best to preserve them for future generations. Okay? Verse 18. A man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a war club or a sword or a sharp arrow. Okay? And I think this gets back to, I think we've covered this a little bit before, but Luther refers to this in the 8th commandment of the Large Catechism. He talks about how a man basically owns his reputation. And just like anything else that a person owns, a reputation can be stolen, taken away, or destroyed. It's a very important possession. And I think what the verse here is trying to say is that when you bear false witness against your neighbor's reputation, you do him damage, his or her. And I gotta be careful about that. I realized the other day that in my sermon, I just I kind of spoke about sons and then speak about daughters, and I kind of regretted that. But it was a mistake you pick up, I guess, after preaching it a couple of times. You don't notice it the first time. A woman or a man's reputation, very important. When your reputation is soiled, there's really nothing you can do about it. I think a lot, when I was still teaching back in the day, I was a lot thinner and probably a lot more attractive than I am now. and I was teaching young girls, and that really, there was some trepidation there, because girls, I was teaching ninth grade girls choir, and not that I am the be all end all, but ninth grade girls can develop crushes for very weird reasons and very silly reasons. And you worry about, if I get myself in a situation, if I'm maybe teaching a voice lesson alone with this person in the room, there's 1,000 different ways. And then that person decides that she wants to destroy my character. Accusations are thrown and they're never taken away. In that kind of situation, when a teacher has an accusation thrown at them, it doesn't matter if it's proven wrong in court. It'll follow you around forever. This is what it is to destroy someone's reputation. I worry about it. My wife worries about it probably more than I do, even as a pastor, what can happen if someone decides to level a false accusation. And it does happen. There's not much you can do. You trust in the Lord. You do your work to the best of your ability, and you hope that justice prevails. Yeah, and actually, we're going to see that later on in the Proverbs today. There's another verse coming up here that I think has a lot to do with that. Right. So, breaking someone's reputation is the same as hurting them, injuring them physically. Right. It's an important thing. Verse 19, trusting in a treacherous man in time of trouble is like a bad tooth or a foot that slips. I can't help but think about so many of our movies and our media, our books are based on this very concept of having to trust someone who is not trustworthy. And like 48 Hours, where the cop teams up with a criminal, these kind of things. These are a lot of our popular media is based on this very concept, right? Trusting in an unrighteous man. So a foot that slips is let's look this up and real quick and see what the word actually is. It sounds kind of like a fun word. It doesn't. I shouldn't say. It doesn't sound fun, but it sounds interesting. Let's take a look at it. A foot out of joint. Okay. So let's take a look at this. Muya death. It's a participle of ma'ad, properly made to slip. So, we're probably talking about a bad ankle, right, or a knee that goes out of joint. We know a lot of things about like ACLs now, right? ACLs, PCLs. So we're probably talking about the bottom of the word here is to slip. Ma'ad is to slip, and the idea being probably in and out of joint, right? So a foot or a knee. The Hebrews probably would have considered anything up to the knee part of the foot, right? They didn't really have a separate word for knee. They had a separate word for hip because of Jacob, but they didn't have a separate word for knee, as far as I can remember. So probably anything from the knee down that was slipping in and out of joint would have been considered a lame foot, right? Or a foot that, in other words, a foot that doesn't work properly. It's slipping in and out of joint. Okay, I think that's interesting. So it's in keeping too with a bad tooth and a foot that slips. So what is a bad tooth in that culture? Without any dental care, a bad tooth would have been a tooth that would continue to get worse. It wouldn't have gotten better. So it is a tooth that causes you pain, it causes you problems, and it continues. It just continues to get worse. It doesn't get better. Just like in this culture, again, without proper medical care, a trick knee, not improperly working ankle wouldn't have gotten better, would have gotten worse, right? So trusting in a treacherous man in time of trouble, when bad things are happening, trusting in a guy who will just as soon hamstring it, and that's an old idiom. Maybe everyone who's watching doesn't know what that means, but a hamstring means to go behind someone and cut the Achilles tendon, so the hamstring rolls up, and it basically it renders someone paralyzed for the most part. You can't really move very well, and it's something that a coward does. He sneaks up behind you, right? That's how you do it. I don't know if there's, one thing that I've always struggled with is, well, in general, when a politician serves for any period of time, they're going to have lots of comments on either side of any issue. This is what politicians do. They speak out of both sides of their mouth with regularity because they're trying to get reelected. It's hard to trust a politician because usually on any given issue, they'll have kind of meandering statements on either side. Now, some things, not necessarily, but most issues. So trusting in a politician in times of trouble, treacherous man. Although there's more real instances of a treacherous man. We probably have plenty of people in our own lives in personal, real ways where we can identify with this statement. Verse 20, going on. There's not a ton there to dig into. Verse 20, whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment on a cold day, and like vinegar on soda. So, what a great what a great verse here. So we have an interesting turn of phrase. Taking off a garment on a cold day doesn't make a ton of sense. And pouring vinegar on soda makes something foamy and kind of agitated, right? You've seen that where you put vinegar and baking soda together and it foams. So what we have here is we got to figure out what this one who sings songs. So this is Sar, Vesar, to sing. Okay, to sing songs. Okay, let's go back and check this next word then. To sing songs. So this is just basically the noun version of to sing. So who sings songs, religious songs, odes, lyric songs, to one with a heavy heart. Oh, okay. So heavy probably isn't a great word here, because this is the word underneath it in the Hebrew is ra'ah. Okay, and the meanings for ra'ah are evil, bad, disagreeable, malignant, unpleasant, displeasing, unhappy, sad heart, disposition or temper, ethically wicked. Okay, there's lots of various definitions for this word. So I think what we're getting at here is that, which makes sense of the rest of the verse, when you're singing songs, right, to someone who's got this evil, heavy heart, most likely the songs are not necessarily soothing the heart, but they're stirring it up, right? Stirring it up to anger, stirring it up to more, just like the soda and vinegar, and like one who takes away a garment in cold weather. So it causes Cold, yeah. Cold takes away a garment in cold weather. I don't have any notes in my study Bible, and I'm not getting a lot from the translation here, other than I would think that in cold weather, you go, if you take off a garment, you kind of go from a place of comfort to not comfort. Maybe, yeah, Stephanie says agitated or irritated, right? So in other words, um, singing songs to someone who's got evil in their heart is a silly thing to do. To stir up. In other words, someone's got evil, bad stuff in their heart, and you're doing your best to stir it up. That's not a good thing. Now, what would be a modern interpretation of this? How we understand this? Maybe knowing someone's upset and feeling the same way towards who they're upset with, and egging them on to start a fight. Maybe wanting them to do what you don't have the courage to do yourself, so you're egging them on to a fight. It's a bad thing. You shouldn't stir them up. It doesn't make any sense. It's like taking off your coat in the cold, right? Verse 21. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. And if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. Now, this would be contradictory to a Hebrew understanding in the Old Testament. Why would I help my enemy? Is my enemy my enemy? Is it? And if he's my enemy, Jews also think we're the promised people. If he's my enemy, he's God's enemy too. So why am I helping him? Right? But of course, Jesus talks about this routinely. He says, if he strikes your cheek, give him the other cheek also. If he takes your cloak, give him your tunic as well. Jesus echoes this statement entirely, right? And then here, this is where we're going to end for today, and also why I wanted to bring it up in reference back to verse 18, right? For you will heap. So in other words, if you give your enemy food, you give your enemy water, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Now, the heap burning coals is that you change how your neighbor thinks. And we can retaliate, and for everything they do to us, we can do to them. And that's exactly what they're expecting, exactly what they're hoping. And perhaps I think some people sometimes pick fights in order to then turn around and play the victim, right? They want to do that. That's kind of the place where they want to dwell. They like the sympathy from other people. They like playing as though they're the ones who are being persecuted and treating poorly, but it isn't necessarily the case. So what do? You treat your enemies with respect and love, and you heap burning coals. Eventually, either through their own conscience, they'll come to understand that they've been wrong, or the community around, the immediate community, will realize that what's going on here is not as it's been reported, right? But actually, it's different. I realize I skipped a verse here. Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest he have his fill of you and hate you. That was pretty straightforward. Isn't there some old idiom about being a house guest? You don't want to overstay your welcome. I've always been this way. Always worried about if people want me around, when they think about me. So I'm always, real reticent to ask for help, to ask for favors, things like that. Not a very Christian way to live, but you should be. I would be willing to help my neighbor. You think I would have the same understanding of my own neighbors? They might want to help me too. Nevertheless, there it is. Some interesting nuggets for today. Verse 22. I had a friend, Bill Weiss, who is a pastor in Iowa. He's a friend of mine in seminary. He would always talk about this verse. You do what's right. Do what's right in the eyes of the Lord. Love your neighbor, and you heap burning coals on their head. Paul actually repeats this verse in an epistle later on. It's how we're to live as Christian people. And the Lord will eventually He'll make everything kind of come out in the end. He'll reward those who do righteous things. So let's jump forward now to Malachi. Malachi, we are in Malachi chapter 7. We are slowly making our way through to the end. We're almost done. Chapter 7 is kind of the beginning to the very end. And the first 6 verses are very difficult. Unfortunately, the ones we're going to read today, very difficult judgment about what's going on in Israel. Okay, the people of God, are they living up to who they're supposed to be? Are they trusting in Him, living according to His Torah, or not? And they are not. So we'll read the first 6 verses, but then we get to the 7th verse, and it turns in a very positive way to, I'm not going to trust in Israel. I'm not going to trust in my neighbor. I'm not going to trust that the people of God around me are going to be the people of God. I'm going to trust in God, and that is all the difference in the world. We'll read the transition verse in verse 7, but we'll stop there because it's kind of a natural place to stop, and then we'll cover maybe the rest of chapter 7 next time. Okay, so let's do the verses 1 through 7 in chapter 7 of the book of Micah. Okay. Woe is me, for I have become as when the summer fruit has been gathered, as when the grapes have been gleaned. There is no cluster to eat, no first ripe fig that my soul desires. The godly has perished from the earth, and there is no one upright among mankind. They all lie in wait for blood, and each hunts the other with a net. Now, I read these 2 verses together because I think they inform on one another. The metaphor at the top is, right? I think God is speaking here. This is God talking, as though He was walking around the land of Israel, and He's reaching into grape vines, He's reaching into fig trees and finding nothing there, right? This is again very similar to the things Christ has to say too when He talks about the fig tree and that it's bearing no fruit. John the Baptist says, bear fruit in keeping with repentance, to the Pharisees and Sadducees. There's no fruit from these people, good fruit of forgiveness, fruit of life, fruit of love and compassion to one another. The love and compassion offer. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. We just read this last Sunday, in the epistle lesson. And I don't want to speak for all pastors, but I know for myself, the reason why I serve as a pastor is because ultimately this message is so meaningful to me, right? That the Lord loves us and that He has given us life and salvation, hope and peace. And the thing that I want to do is to care for my people and keep reminding them of that lesson as they live lives that are routinely marred by sin, right? They live lives where they're struggling with the difficulties of the world. They're just kind of up to their necks in the problems and difficulties of the world and sin. My hope is to continue to offer them hope and peace from God, that they can kind of make it, right? So I think the person who serves as a pastor does so because he has love in his heart, right? He wants to do good things. And out of this love comes good fruit, a love that was given to us by Christ and now that we give to other people. There's no fruit in the people of Israel. The godly, in fact, have perished from the earth. There's no one upright among mankind. Paul echoes this thought in Romans, right? For no one is good, right? There's no righteous person. So we have the end of verse 2. It's interesting. They all lie in wait for blood. I don't know if I could better approximate what life is right now. everyone, there is this thing, this false idea of righteousness, to look and to appear as a good person out there in the world, and then the world determines what that is. Primarily it's, are you tolerant of everything, but ironically tolerant of the things that are very clearly dictated to you from the group that decides what tolerance actually is. Are you, all these rules, right? And if you transgress the rules out in at least the digital sphere, and sometimes it's not just digital sphere anymore, sometimes it's like real life. Yeah. Maybe you're walking downtown, there's a small protest for like, let's say, homosexual rights or something, right? And they're handing out flyers and you don't want to take one. And then you're shamed for not taking one, not being part of the protest. So it's not just in the digital world, it's out in the real world as well. There's this secular wokeness that if you're not part of it, you'll be shamed. And what I mean by the connected to is, when you don't, then there's this public shaming process that happens. We're going to destroy you publicly. We're going to destroy your reputation, your character, so that you can never have any power again. And when we're done with you, we'll go on to the next person who defies what we think is good, right, and salutary, so to speak. So it's interesting. They all lie and wait for blood. I feel like there's a lot of people out there in the world who want to raise their status by destroying other people, and they just kind of lie and wait, waiting for someone to transgress these rules, if that makes any sense. So anyway, and each hunts the other with a net. Now, this net word is very fascinating. Okay, it comes from another word. It's really strange. So it's harem, and the word typically means harem is cursed. Isn't that weird? Cursed. So it refers to the city of Jericho, which is interesting, right? Which makes sense. The city of Jericho falling. And it also, something that's devoted or banned. So you can see that like maybe laying down a curse on Jericho and saying, we're never going to go there again. We're never going to see that or talk to that again, so to speak, those kind of things. So later on then, it talks about being a perforated work, a noun masculine for net, something perforated. And the Phoenicians were makers of nets. I think the idea being here is that when you net something, when you're hunting, not when you're fishing, when you net something when you're hunting, there's no escape. So I think the idea here would be is that you net something and then it's devoted to destroy. It's going to be killed. It's definitely going to be killed. It's going to be destroyed. And I get the feeling from the context of the verse that a net isn't seen as a real sportsman-like way to hunt, if that makes any sense. Like, I remember in North Dakota for a long time as a kid. I don't know if it's still the case now, but certain people could use a crossbow. Which is a crossbow is a bow that's mounted kind of like on a gun handle, and then you pull it back and you've got a bolt instead of an arrow, I think. And so it becomes a lot simpler to hunt with a bow. And sometimes people who weren't handicapped, that this was the exception, that handicapped people could use a crossbow to bow hunt then animals. But some people would try to do it who weren't handicapped, and was seen like, oh, this is very, it's almost like cheating. If you're going to hunt a deer with a bow, then hunt a deer with a bow, So I get the sense that this net is carrying the same kind of idea, that they cheat when they can. They're unsportsmanlike. They hunt with a net. and they're going to devote that thing to destruction. I just thought it was interesting. I don't know if didn't know if you had any thoughts there or had seen it. God's going to go further here to describe the people of Israel. Their hands are on what is evil to do it well. The prince and the judge ask for a bribe, and the great man utters the evil desire of his soul. Thus they weave it together. So this is society in Israel. It's all kind of one big woven together mess, right? So let's talk about the individual pieces here. Their hands are on what is evil to do it well. So I don't know if that necessarily has to be specific things that are evil. Like maybe we're talking about are we talking about maybe an idol or evil? I don't think it's necessarily that, but rather just evil in general. And to do it well is their hand. Perhaps they're putting their hands to a task, like they're like a basket weaver or a carpenter or someone who does this kind of work. They're putting their hand. They're practicing it. They're almost what's the word? Apprenticing in evil. When you have an apprentice, like electrician or someone, they're hands-on. They're working really hard to practice to do evil. These are people who are not just doing evil by accident or doing evil because it's easy. They're literally trying to get better at doing evil, which is a really scary thought. The prince and the judge ask for that. That could be more straightforward. The prince and the judge are maybe the offices of leader and then person who's supposed to remain, what's the word? Remain unbiased in their judging, right? So the prince is a ruler who's supposed to stand for what's right for the country and for the people. Instead, he's asking for what's best for him. The judge is supposed to remain unbiased, but he's asking for a bribe in order to do what's best for him. The money's what's best for him, right? And the great man utters the evil desire. So the great man would be a leader in a general sense, right? A leader who's supposed to do the right thing is so far gone that this should be scandalous to you. It's scandalous even to me. And I can give you an example of this, not to pick, okay? I don't mean to pick, but there was a tweet where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said we need to keep the coronavirus quarantines in place until after the election, right? And so, I mean, like the inner workings of what she was thinking became public. And then almost immediately she took the tweet down because she thought that was a bad idea, right? Obviously. So this is what's going on. The evil man, he doesn't even try to hide his evil anymore. He just blatantly, openly talks about the evil that he's going to do and the things contrary to God's will that he's going to do. He talks about it openly in public. So it shows two things. Number one, it shows that there's no one who's going to counter him. He talks openly in public. The only reason he'd hide it is he'd worried that maybe someone might check him in public. They might actually say, like, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. But things have gotten so bad in Israel that he's going to talk openly about evil, and no one's going to even question him about it, which is sad. And he has no fear of retribution from God either, right? Thus, this is society all woven together. It's a place of evil. Okay, going on, verse 4. The best of them is like a briar, the most upright of them a thorn hedge. Now, what does this mean? Well, there's no fruit. We go all the way back to the very first thing here. God goes to the people. He's done this before. In Isaiah, the same thing. He talks about the parable of the vineyard in Isaiah. He's like, I've built the wall. I've watered you. I've given you choice land. I've done all these things, and you don't produce good grapes, only bad, right? You never produce any fruit. This is not a new concept. Micah here takes it and he says, the best of them is like a briar or like a thorn hedge. So in other words, there's no fruit to be found on these plants, and rather all they are is things that capture and catch people, cause pain and obstruction, difficulty, right? This is the best. This is all they are, right? Now, God's going to switch here a minute here. So now he's done kind of describing. He says this: the day of your watchmen of your punishment has come. Now their confusion is at hand. And I think their confusion is at hand is maybe a reference to Gideon. Gideon, God sends the 300 men to surround the camp. I want to say it's Canaanites or it's Moabites. I can't remember what tribe it is. I should have looked that up. Well, let's maybe it's Philistines. It could be. Although I think they were later. I think they were during David's time. Midianites. Not even close. Not the, Midianites. Yeah. Okay. So Gideon's poised around the camp of the Midianites, and he has these torches and jars, and they're all in the. So it's night. It's dark. The Midianites don't know what's going on, and suddenly they start blowing the horns and shattering these torches, and they throw the whole camp into confusion. Right? They're falling over each other. They even turn against one another. The Midianites, and all sorts of problems and eventually what happens is Gideon descends on the camp and destroys the whole camp, devotes it to destruction. There's another one where this confusion comes up in the Egyptians. They follow the Israelites into the bottom of the Red Sea, and then God literally, it talks about in the book of Exodus that in the pillar of fire, there almost is, in the very rough text, it almost talks about that there's eyes in the fire that look down on the Egyptians and throw them into a panic, throw them into a confusion. And they're trying to get out, and they're trying to turn around and go back, but their wheels get stuck in the mud, and it almost talks about how their wheels are getting stuck, and their wheels are coming off the chariots and things. Confusion. So I think the idea of confusion here would be that in the coming judgment, the destruction, there is just a screaming, a confusion, a fear, like these examples in the Old Testament. Okay. Now their confusion is at hand. So verse 5. Now we're getting into who is God speaking to? Well, God was speaking to Israel as a whole, right? And now I think God's going to narrow his focus. He's talking to the remnant, the people who still trust in the Lord. There aren't many of them, but he's going to talk to them. Listen to this. Put no trust in a neighbor. Have no confidence in a friend. Guard the doors of your mouth from her who lies in your arms. This is actually, the word here is not her who lies in your, but her who lies on your bosom, right? So who are we talking about? We're talking about, it's kind of like a decrescendo or a narrowing here. So first we have friends. No, well, I should say neighbor first. These are anyone who's in your community, right? Anyone who's part of your community that you're around, they're your neighbor, right? So neighbor, friend. I think in the original text it goes companion. So it would be someone maybe like acquaintance, friend, or companion, right? So like someone you know as opposed to someone you're in relation with. And then what? Guard the doors of your mouth from her who lies in your arms. So your spouse, your wife, be careful what you say to her, or else, well, and then we might ask, well, why? Okay. For the son treats the father with contempt. The daughter rises up against her mother. The daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own house. And we actually have a really close thing to this from Jesus. Matthew chapter 10, verse 34. Do not think I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Right? So what's the thought here? I think we see this. I just had a terrible situation. A father spoke to me and told me that he was trying to discipline his children for their good, and his children called CPS on him so that he couldn't discipline them for their good, right? We see in Nazi Germany, especially in China during the Cultural Revolution, in the Soviet Union at certain times during their history as well, that you couldn't trust anyone. You couldn't trust your own children. They would be reporting on you. And there was benefits to turning in your own mother or brother. You could move up by turning them in if they were maybe against the party or things like that, or doing things against the party. This was true in Nazi Germany as well. You had people turning in their own family members. So the point is that even blood, family blood, will not keep people from doing evil. When the judgment comes, they'll turn over their own grandmother, for example, in order to escape the coming wrath. And that's what's going on here. This coming wrath, and let's be clear too, the wrath comes not because God does things willy-nilly, does things however he wishes. The wrath is coming because Israel has, we go all the way back to verses 1 through 3. Well, I suppose 1 through 4, sort of. Israel has been a people that have done evil in the sight of the Lord against other people. It's just been their MO. And so they're being punished because they do evil against the Lord, not because it's some random kind of thing. So it doesn't bring me peace. I love my kids very much. I love my wife very much. The thought of one of them betraying me is terrifying. But the point is, I think here, this is Christ. Well, can I read again from Christ, because I didn't finish here? He says in verse 37, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So let's be honest with ourselves. We can make idols of a lot of things, and we can even make idols of our own family. And the problem with the idol of family is that it looks exceedingly good to the outside world and even to the inside of the church. No one would probably call you on anything if you were, giving an exorbitant amount of time to your children and to your wife. But if it comes at the cost of being in church, let's say, receiving the sacraments, hearing the gospel, if it comes at the sacrifice of standing for God's truth and his will, right? If you're so afraid to lose your family that you're not willing to stand up for what God actually says. In Africa, this happens. You have child soldiers that come into the house. They tell mom and dad, give up your God, or we're going to, this is the son, right? Or we're going to kill you. And the mom and dad say no, right? We worship God. We worship Christ. We will not turn away from him for anything, right? I don't think this has come upon us yet, but I think there are times where our children have walked away from the faith, and we'll do anything to convince ourselves that no, that they're still faithful, they still love Christ, they still are on board, and we delude ourselves into thinking that things are all fine and good, because we don't want to kind of create any friction in the family. You know what? Create some friction in the family. If there's one person who will listen to you, it's your children. I know you don't want to hear that. I know that's really hard to swallow at times, because you really want your relationships with your kids to be good and well. But if they are heading towards hell because they've rejected Christ, any amount of time that you spend with them here that's peaceful will pale in comparison with the eternity that we'll spend without them in heaven. If you need to make some divisions, make some divisions, because hopefully we can win them for Christ. Don't let family become an idol that pulls you away from Jesus and his truth. And his truth is this. I love God the most in my life. Now, by loving God the most in my life, I love my family, right? It's not that I treat them poorly, but I've got to put him in priority, number one. He made me. He redeemed me. He saved me from the pit. He is my Lord. I owe him everything. He has given me wonderful blessings, a wife, 4 children, 5 children, a home, and a future. So how can I take the gifts that he's given me and make them more important than he who gave the gifts? Doesn't make a lot of sense. Listen to this verse 7. Verse 7, I think, turns it around and really makes this end in a positive note. It's where I want to end for today, okay? But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me, right? So regardless of what's going on around me, even in my own family, possibly, I will wait for God. I will wait for his judgment. I'll wait for his vindication. I'll wait for his righteousness. I'll wait for his grace and compassion. I'll wait for him to act and to save me. So I think that's probably what we ought to do too in this very crazy world that we live in. Have trust and consolation, knowing that the Lord will act and he will save us. We just need to wait. His time is not our time. I'm sure the Israelites thought the same thing when waiting for Jesus. Hundreds of years, thousands of years, really from the very first, from Genesis 3:15, right? Thousands of years until Christ actually comes. They've been waiting for a long time, but Christ comes exactly when he's supposed to come. And he will come again exactly when he's supposed to come. So we have to trust in the Lord and wait for his mercy. I hope you've had a wonderful time today in Bible study. Very thankful to have you today. Lord's blessings. Have a wonderful rest of your day.